What if the most ancient story of humanity was hidden in a place we never thought to look? Yemen. Not the Yemen you've seen in headlines or maps, the one labeled poor, tribal, isolated. But Yemen is buried beneath centuries of dust and silence, a genetic archive older than empires. Because when scientists began decoding Yemeni DNA, they didn't find a simple Arab lineage. They found something that shouldn't exist. A bloodline stitched together from every corner of the early human world. Ghost ancestors from deep Africa, forgotten Levantine hunters, sea-crossing queens from Ethiopia, and tribal kings who ruled deserts long before the prophet's words echoed across Arabia. How could all of them coexist in one genome? This wasn't just migration. It was a convergence, a place where ancient human paths didn't pass through. They collided. And here's the paradox that no one talks about. The same Yemen called unchanging, remote, left behind, carries some of the most complex DNA on Earth. Geneticists were stunned. They called it a fossil, a time capsule. One said, it's like someone pressed pause on the entire human story and stored it in the mountains of Yemen. So why haven't you heard about this? Why is one of the most genetically layered populations, one that could reshape our understanding of Arab identity, of African origins, of human migration itself, still left out of the global story? Maybe because it doesn't fit the narrative. Maybe because Yemen's DNA doesn't belong to any one people, it belongs to all of us. But to truly understand this riddle, to decode why Yemeni DNA looks like no other, we have to rewind. Not 1,000 years, not 10,000, but 60,000 years, to a time before nations, before kings, when the very first humans faced the sea and crossed into a land that no one thought they could reach. The real mystery of Yemen begins at a crossing no one believed was possible. The mystery begins at the water's edge, not a wide sea, just a narrow throat between two continents. At the southern tip of the Red Sea, where Africa almost touches Arabia, there lies a passage so small, so overlooked, you could miss it on a map. But 60,000 years ago, it was everything. Because this is where the first humans crossed. Not through Egypt, not through the Sinai, but through Yemen. Scientists once thought this was impossible. The route was too harsh, too dry, too dangerous. But new genetic evidence says otherwise. The Yemeni genome whispers the truth. Buried deep in the mitochondrial code, passed only from mother to child, are lineages called L2A1 and L6. These aren't just random African markers. They're time travelers, ancient signals frozen in time, unchanged by the great conquests, untouched by the empires. These mothers, they didn't just migrate. They survived. They carried the memory of a journey that reshaped the world. And their daughters, over thousands of years, gave birth to the people we now call Yemenis. Every time a child was born in the hills of Sheba, or the valleys near Marib, a piece of that first exodus lived on. And yet, this story was forgotten, not because it lacked evidence, but because it didn't fit the neat picture. Because if Yemen was the first stop, then it wasn't just part of the Arab world. It was the beginning of the non-African world. Imagine it, a barefoot crossing during an ice age, when the sea was low, the winds were wild, and the stars were the only map. No nations, no borders, just the will to move. The Red Sea was not a barrier, it was a bridge. But just when you think the path makes sense, just when you trace that bloodline back to Africa's edge, something breaks the pattern. Because inside those same Yemeni genomes are pieces of DNA that match neither Africa nor Asia, a signal with no name, no homeland, and no explanation. And yet, it's there, hiding in the blood of Yemen. Scientists call it a ghost lineage, a genetic signature from a species of ancient humans that no one has ever seen. No bones, no skulls, no tools, only whispers in the genome. While most non-African populations show Neanderthal ancestry, Yemenis don't follow the script. Their Neanderthal DNA is unusually low. But something else is there, something that doesn't match Neanderthal, or Denisovan, or any known archaic human. It's as if, somewhere deep in time, a different kind of human walked the Arabian Peninsula. One who left no trace, except in Yemen's cells. Geneticists believe this ghost admixture could be over 70,000 years old, maybe even older. The signal is subtle, but it repeats, generation after generation. A marker of deep divergence, like a shadow behind the curtain of modern ancestry. And what makes it more strange? It only shows up clearly in Yemen. Nowhere else in the Middle East, not in Ethiopia, not even in South Asia. Just here, clinging to the hills of Sheba and the valleys of Hadramaut. Some think it came from an isolated archaic hominin, one that evolved separately after early humans left Africa, possibly before they ever reached Europe. Others say it could be a remnant of the very first failed migrations, an echo from a people who vanished, leaving no story behind. But their genes survived, passed down quietly, wrapped into the DNA of those who stayed. It's a theory that breaks open everything we thought we knew about early humans. If true, it would mean Yemen was not just a stop on the journey out of Africa. It was a meeting point, a fusion, a place where one human species became something more by touching the blood of another. But the ghost is just the beginning, because as we go deeper into Yemen's genetic code, another anomaly emerges, not a mystery from prehistory, but from a time we thought we did understand. A civilization older than the Bible, and its footprint, its genes, are still alive in Yemen. That ancient ghost, the one we couldn't name, couldn't trace, wasn't the only one hiding in Yemen's blood, because just beneath that spectral signal, scientists found something else, something older than cities, older than prophets, maybe even older than the first crop ever planted. They found Natufian DNA, not in Israel, not in Palestine, but in Yemen. And not just traces, not fragments. 50 to 60% of Yemen's genome is Natufian. The irony, the Natufians never lived in Yemen. Their bones were buried in caves of northern Israel and the Levant, around 12,000 to 14,000 years ago. They were the first humans to build stone houses, the first to bury their dead with care, the first to taste the idea of permanence. But here's the twist. In the north, they vanished. When the Neolithic wave hit, when Anatolian and Zagros farmers swept in with new genes, new grains, new gods, the Natufians were almost erased, replaced, absorbed. But not in Yemen. Yemen didn't join the revolution. No great Neolithic flood came to wash away its people. There were no Anatolian Y-DNA replacements, no massive farming migrations, no reset. Instead, the Natufians endured, preserved in tribes that farmed their own way, in valleys that stayed hidden, protected by mountains and time. It's as if Yemen pressed pause on history and kept the old world breathing. That's why geneticists call Yemen a southern relic zone, a vault where Levantine DNA didn't just survive, it stayed untouched. And that opens up a question no one can yet answer. Why? Why did Yemen resist what the entire Middle East could not? Was it the geography, the isolation, or something deeper? A cultural refusal to be rewritten? The people of the Highlands, Sheba, Marib, Damer, they didn't just hold on to genes. They held on to memory. The memory of a people who built before history began. But that memory isn't just in their bones, it's in their names. Because while the North forgot its Natufian past, Yemen carried it into legend. And through that same genetic doorway, we now enter a bloodline even older. Not of mothers, this time, but of fathers. Fathers whose DNA still rules the mountains. Fathers who claimed they were kings. May have been right, because when scientists traced the Y chromosomes of Yemeni men, what they found wasn't just a pattern. It was a dynasty. A staggering 60 to 80% of Yemeni males carry one ancestral signature, haplogroup J1A, a marker older than Muhammad, older than the Torah, older even than the rise of Semitic civilization. J1A is deep, Arab deep, Levantine deep. But in Yemen, it's something else. It's royal, linked not to empires built by sword, but to lineages held together by tribe, by vow, by blood alone. And where it runs strongest is the Highlands, places like Marib, Damer, and the forgotten capital of Sheba, once ruled by the queen whose story still lives in scripture. Archaeologists now map J1A directly onto those same lands, the bones in the ground matching the blood of the living. And here's the shock, it never broke. Not through Persian invasion, not through the Roman footprint, not through Islamic caliphates or Ottoman conquest. The world changed, but these male lines didn't. They stayed, generation after generation, tribe after tribe, repeating names, defending borders, marrying cousins to protect the root. This wasn't isolation. This was strategy. Because for Yemeni tribes, lineage wasn't just identity, it was law. You were only as real as your father's name. And that name, etched in the Y-DNA, carried a memory older than any written record. It's why some scientists call Yemen a living Y chromosome museum. But this museum only tells half the story, because while the fathers remained, rooted in soil, stone, and code, the mothers were arriving, not by camel, not by caravan, but by sea. From across the narrow red waters came women with no coin, no map, and no way back. And their DNA tells a story of chains. They came without names, but left behind a nation, while the fathers of Yemen were rooted in mountains, tracing their ancestry to tribal kings and prophets. The mothers were carried in, not with caravans or scrolls, but with silence. Across the Red Sea, through ports like Zabid and Mocha, they arrived generation after generation. Many were slaves. Some were servants. Few had choices. And yet, they changed everything. Because when scientists studied Yemeni mitochondrial DNA, the code passed only from mother to child, they found something extraordinary. Almost half of it came from Africa. Not the north, but deep Africa. Haplogroup L2A1, common in Ethiopia, powerful across the Red Sea coast. And then something rare, L6, an ancient maternal line found almost nowhere else on Earth, except in Yemen. Not even in the African lands it supposedly came from. It's as if this lineage crossed once and then disappeared from history, preserved not in tombs or temples, but in the women who gave birth in silence. No monuments, no songs, just a genetic signature, repeating quietly in child after child, mother after mother, for 1,000 years. The timeline matches. Arab traders, medieval slavers, Red Sea merchants. But here's what makes Yemen different. Most cultures erased the lineage of enslaved women. Yemen absorbed it. Islamic law said the child of a slave woman was born free. So those lineages didn't vanish. They became Yemeni. They shaped the dialects, the lullabies, the very faces of the coast. And while the fathers guarded their tribal purity, the mothers carried the memory of Africa into every branch of the family tree. No one wrote down their names, but the DNA remembers. And it splits Yemen in two, because in the Highlands, the blood runs old, Arab, and unshaken. But down by the sea, it tells a different story. A story of crossings, of mixing, of survival. And the genetic map begins to blur sharply, because now we step into a nation divided not by war, but by ancestry. One country, but two different timelines. Stand in the markets of Aden, and you'll hear languages bend. The rhythm of Swahili brushing against Arabic, East Africa woven into every face. But travel north, up into the highlands of Sheba and Sana'a, and the world changes. The voices get sharper. The customs are older. The genes colder. It's like stepping between two histories that never met. Because while Yemen looks like a single nation on a map, genetically it isn't. In places like Udaida and Zabid, African ancestry pulses in the DNA, especially maternal lines, flowing from generations of East African contact, trade, and slavery. But in the mountains, it's different. There, the DNA holds firm. Tribes in Damar, Al-Mawid, and Marib have kept the same genetic structure for thousands of years. Some clans show almost no admixture for over 4,000 years, a living fossil of ancient Arabia. It wasn't luck. It was the law. Tribal endogamy, the rule of marrying within, wasn't just tradition. It was a strategy. You didn't just marry a cousin. You married your bloodline. You preserved it like a scroll. And over time, this created something rare, a founder effect. In genetics, that means a population was shaped by just a few ancestors, and stayed that way. No floods of new genes. No mixing. Just slow, quiet continuity. It's why you'll find unique Y chromosome patterns in Highland tribes. Rare alleles. Even mutations that exist nowhere else on Earth. This isn't one person, it's dozens of micropopulations, layered like ancient parchment. Each tribe, its own chapter. Each valley, a different rhythm of time. But that kind of preservation comes with a cost. Because while the coast absorbed and evolved, the mountains sealed their identity like a vault. And inside that vault, some things survived that shouldn't have. Lineages, traits, secrets older than memory. Because if these tribes could preserve 4,000 years of untouched DNA, you have to ask, what else did they preserve? Inside those sealed-off valleys, the answer isn't just cultural, it's genetic. Because when scientists looked closer at Yemen's Highland tribes, they didn't just see continuity. They saw something stranger, something far rarer. Founder effects. Imagine this: a small group of ancestors, isolated by mountains, geography, and law, becomes the blueprint for thousands. Over centuries, their DNA repeats, amplifies, locks in. In Yemen, it's not a theory. It's written in the blood. Certain clans show genetic bottlenecks so sharp, they carry high frequencies of haplotypes seen nowhere else in the world. This isn't a result of migration, but preservation. The same endogamy that kept identities pure also froze rare lineages like a time machine. And in cities like Sana'a, consanguinity levels, cousin marriages, and tribal close bond unions reach as high as 44%. It was a way to protect name, land, blood, but it came with a hidden cost. Because while founder effects preserve identity, they also preserve risk. Rare genetic disorders passed quietly from generation to generation. Silent mutations, now expressing themselves in ways the ancestors never saw. Yemen's DNA is like a glass jar, sealed, stored, protected from time. But inside that jar are both treasures and cracks. Genes that tell of unbroken legacy, and genes that warn of fragility. Still, for geneticists, that sealed jar is priceless, because locked inside it is something they never expected to find. A lineage so rare, so old, it doesn't show up even in the regions it supposedly came from. Not Ethiopia, not Sudan, not Egypt. Only here, buried deep in western Yemen. Mitochondrial haplogroup L6. Its origins are still unknown. Its migration story incomplete. Some think it may have crossed once, then vanished. Others think it evolved right here, inside Arabia. But if that's true, it means this one maternal lineage didn't come to Yemen. It was born in Yemen, and that changes everything. That's what the evidence now suggests. Because mitochondrial haplogroup L6, one of the rarest maternal lineages on Earth, isn't found across Africa, where it should be. It barely shows up in Ethiopia. Almost none in Sudan. Traces in Somalia. But in Yemen, it thrives. Not everywhere, just in the West. In the ancient towns that face the Red Sea, where the coast blurs with memory. Scientists still argue over how it got there. Some say it crossed the Red Sea tens of thousands of years ago, during the first human migrations, and was later lost in Africa. Others believe something more radical, that it evolved here, after arrival. That L6 may not be African in origin, but Arabian in legacy. That somewhere in the early mix of humans moving across the Horn of Africa, something new took shape on the western edge of Yemen. A lineage that carried forward, not by conquest, but by quiet integration, by women. Because L6 isn't a political marker. It doesn't trace kingdoms or armies. It traces mothers. And the descendants of those L6 women? They shaped the coast. Not in textbooks, but in everyday life. The spices in the stew. The rhythm of old songs. The way Arabic bends and sways in the dialects of Hudaida and Taiz. This isn't just a gene. It's a fingerprint, pressed into the soul of a region. And yet, it's invisible. You won't see it in flags or family trees. But it's there, waiting in the blood. And here's where the story twists again. Because while this maternal legacy tells a story of ancient crossing, another lineage, far closer, far more familiar, begins to challenge everything we thought we knew about separation. When geneticists studied Yemeni Jews, they didn't just find religion. They found bloodlines, the kind that blur faith and collapse walls. They prayed in different languages. They read from different books. But when the genome spoke, it said something neither side expected. Yemenite Jews and Muslim Yemenis are almost genetically identical. Same haplogroups, same deep ancestry, same invisible ink written beneath the skin. For over 2,000 years, they lived side by side. sometimes in harmony, sometimes in shadow. But they didn't wander. They didn't mix with foreign lands. They stayed. And in that staying, something incredible happened. The DNA froze in time. Generation after generation, both communities repeated their bloodlines like ritual, echoing the same ancient roots. Not just from the prophets, but from farmers, priests, warriors long before religion drew its lines. Geneticists now say the divergence between Jewish and Muslim Yemenis is so recent, it's barely visible in the genome. A few surnames may change, a few customs, but the blood? It remembers everything. In the Highlands of Sana'a, you'll find Jewish families whose mitochondrial lines trace to the same maternal L haplogroups as their Muslim neighbors. In the markets of Taiz, you'll hear echoes of the same dialect, shaped not by belief, but by land. Even the cuisine, the spices, the stews, the bread, carries no divide. It's one land, two scrolls, but the same ink. And yet, this shared ancestry, this ancient continuity, has been left out of the global conversation, ignored in textbooks, absent from the big genomic databases. Why? Maybe because Yemen doesn't fit the narrative. Maybe because when a single genome breaks the illusion of separation, it's easier not to look. But if this DNA is real, and it is, then it means the lines we draw between faiths are newer than we think. And the deeper truth is still buried. Because even with all this evidence, all this history is written in blood. Yemen's genome is still missing from the map, still invisible in the global story of us. And to understand why, we have to ask a harder question. Not just what was forgotten, but who decided to forget it. Not nature, not time, not the people who carried it forward. The forgetting came later, from outside. Because Yemen holds one of the richest genetic archives in human history, and yet, it's been pushed to the margins. A nation at the crossroads of migration, empire, and myth, but erased from the genomic spotlight. Its DNA blends threads no other land can claim. Deep African maternal roots, preserved through silent crossings. Ancient Arabian fathers, locked in mountains for millennia. Natufian echoes, older than farming, still humming in the blood. And somewhere between them all, ghost lineages, lost hominins, secrets we haven't even named yet. But here's the heartbreak. While Yemen preserved humanity's most ancient inheritance, the world let it fade. Major studies skip it. International databases barely include it. Funding dries up before it begins. The genome that could rewrite migration maps, challenge racial myths, connect continents, remains unread. A library in flames. And yet the people endure. In the souks of Sana'a, in the cliffside villages of Haraz, in the songs sung at night by firelight, the code is still alive. They carry it unknowingly, like breath. DNA that remembers what empires forgot. The genome doesn't cry for attention. It waits. And it deserves more than pity, more than politics. It deserves to be understood. Because these genes, this living archive, survived the Red Sea, the Ice Age, the rise and fall of Sheba, the collapse of kingdoms. They survived 60,000 years of war, weather, worship, and silence. The question now isn't what they contain. It's whether we will let them vanish. Will we preserve this living key to our oldest human story? Or will we keep writing history with blind spots? Because Yemen isn't the end of the map. It's the beginning of a bigger one. And in our next story, that map twists again into the highlands of the Caucasus, where one forgotten bloodline connects ancient Persians to Scythian warriors, to people still walking the mountains of Pakistan. The Pashtun,